This video is dedicated to those who will recognize themselves as Hyperboreans. It's a video for anyone because it is made public, but the Hyperboreans, as I envision them, are Europeans who have undergone a certain intellectual and spiritual path and who possess esoteric knowledge. And I made a series of videos in a playlist, Hyperborea, and I recommend that if you feel that you belong to the golden race, as it is said, you should watch the whole playlist, because otherwise this video will be unintelligible. And I will simply summarize in broad outline my view of things. There are two ways of looking at the world as I envision it. There's the perspective of der Verstand, which is ordinary classical rationality, and it is a chronological view, the idea that everything emerges from the Big Bang and that we are a result of cosmological evolution, and then a Darwinian evolution, and then historical evolution. And I believe that this view must be understood in a verstandisch way, in a rational way, as the rationality of modern physicists. But the real point of view that I envision is a point of view of die Vernunft, reason, which is a speculative view, the idea that it is consciousness, and in this case my consciousness, which sets the world, and that the chronological understanding of history, whether cosmological, Darwinian, or historical, is a backward projection in time, and that when one achieves speculative understanding, the categories of time and space vanish, and the Hyperborean consciousness is a consciousness of the divine beyond the divide between subject and object, time and eternity. And this is the kind of consciousness that I would like to share with those who will recognize themselves as such in the videos. And in this video I would like to adopt first a chronological verstandisch point of view, and I made a video explaining the emergence in the broad outline of the National Socialist ideology, what made it come into being, and what explained it in the broad outlines, the circumstances, historical, which brought about the rise of this ideology. And eugenics, from the point of view of chronological, cosmological Darwinian evolution, is a moment when nature, which produces by its own laws, produces man through Darwinian evolution. And man, in this view, is nature becoming conscious of itself. And through man's consciousness, nature sees herself, because we are natural beings and we are within nature, and what we see around us, the world of time and space and matter and energy and the physical forces made manifest through phenomena, is our own being, our own primordial being, and we can, through a cognitive activity, reflect upon this world and discover its laws, its regularities. And when we think about the laws of nature in this perspective, we think about ourselves, about the laws which brought forth our own being and our own consciousness. And this is a Schellingian and Fichtean perspective. And to illustrate the moment of Newton in this perspective, is the moment when nature through the mediation of the individual man that we acknowledge as being Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, in this perspective, was a product of nature, of the entire cosmological and Darwinian evolution and historical evolution. So the moment of the Principia Mathematica is a moment when nature, through an individual mind, grasps one of its fundamental laws. And this self-understanding of nature through the mediation of a human mind enabled a growth of epistemological, scientific, technological progress, which helped develop the many sciences like physics, of course, but chemistry and later biology, because all the sciences try to model their method upon the Newtonian rationalistic, in a sense of Verstandisch view. And the moment of eugenics, the birth of the eugenic consciousness, I have already said it, is a following of the discovery by Darwin, who is some sort of the Newton of biology in this cosmological perspective. It is a moment when, through an individual mind, nature becomes conscious of its own biological laws. And a scientific discovery has consequences on other minds. And the birth of eugenics through the mediation of Francis Galton and the early eugenicists of the 20th century. I can think of Lothrop Stoddard in the realm of journalism, and there was Lapouge, a French anthropological race realist, and probably many others. I'm not familiar with all the names of the eugenic movements, but I know that in the early at the end of the 19th century and in the early moments of the 20th century, there was eugenical circles, and it was nature, through the mediation of these individual minds thinking about the laws of biology, seeking to understand itself and unconsciously wishing to improve itself, to improve the human species. And in this case it was Nordic, mostly European people who had these thoughts, because it was in the context of Nordic Western Europe that this consciousness was brought forth. The will to improve itself and to use the laws of nature, which are the laws of the human mind and the laws of human existence, because in this perspective humans are the product of natural evolution. So it's nature reflecting upon herself, taking herself as a mirror and wishing to use its own laws to improve itself, to create more strength, more beauty, more intelligence. And this this eugenic idea started to develop among the scientific communities, but also among the far-right circles, notably in Weimar, Germany. And they had a profound influence upon the ideological birth of National Socialism. And Kevin MacDonald, the sociobiologist, scientist of modern times, made books and writings to explain that National Socialism was an attempt to imitate the ethnic solidarity of certain parts of the Jewish people who had, throughout the ages, it was being discovered by the studies of the far right, most notably the scientists, but also the far right circles of this early decades of the 20th century, that National Socialism was more or less consciously a mirror image, an attempt to imitate the biological solidarity with partly a eugenic component to imitate what had made the success, ethnic, political, um, intellectual, economic of the Jewish people. So the some National Socialist thinkers were envious and jealous and admired in a way the Jews, and they wanted to have the recipe of the success of the Jews for themselves, and it's a Hegelian process of Aufhebung, which means to negate the other, because in the mind of these National Socialist thinkers, the Jews were the other, the enemy. So they wanted to negate, but at the same time to preserve what had made the success of the other. So it was a dialectical attempt to aufheben, to suppress while preserving, and to use the knowledge and the characteristic of the other in order to improve the self, which in this view was considered to be the German people and more broadly the Nordic people. And I have not yet read the book, but I'm giving the broad interpretation which enables the understanding of this moment in a Hegelian consideration. And I had an understanding, it was in 2017 December. I said to myself, the figure of the German Chancellor is very ambiguous, because on the one hand he's the most hated historical figure ever by the broad majority of people all over the world, and especially in Western Europe, but at the same time he is admired by some people, the right-wing Europeans. They will not all acknowledge that, but some of them admire the German Chancellor, and even in the Muslim world there are people who admire him. So he is an ambiguous figure because he's universally despised, but at the same time, for those who do not despise him, he's the most admired figure and most admired character. And he rebelled in a way against those who are considered to be God's chosen people. So he made an act of rebellion and violent act against the dominant intellectually, politically, economically people of his time, and who are those who still dominate because of their superior intelligence and work ethic, but yeah, today. So I said to myself, but this reminds me of a mythological figure that in the West we call Prometheus. Prometheus is the god who rebelled against Zeus and who stole the fire from the king of the gods to bring it to mankind. And Prometheus is an ambiguous figure. Some admire him, some despise him because he brought progress and suffering also with it. But Karl Marx admired the figure of Prometheus. Mary Shelley, I think, made him some sort of a Frankenstein monster. It's an ambiguous figure which has stimulated the imagination of poets and thinkers in the Western tradition. And he was punished for having stolen the fire from Zeus, and he was crucified in a way by being nailed on the Mount Caucasus and suffered torment. And the figure of the German Chancellor is still being tormented today, because he constantly, every day, we are reminded of how evil he was and how, yeah. And for those in the right-wing circles who admire this figure, it's a very difficult path, because what they admire the most is being tormented through books which are published, critiques, and movies which are made constantly, and that's a very difficult thing to bear for those who appreciate this figure. So I realized when I had this view in December 2017 that how could the ancient Greek, through their mythology, predict or use images which would explain, by means of representation, a figure of 20th century world history and European history. How is that possible? And I later, much later, realized that for Hegel, art, religion, and philosophy are the manifestation of absolute truth. So that art and religion, mythology is a mixture of artistic expression and religious expression, is more true than mathematics, physics, biology, and history. And that's a very difficult idea to grasp. But the way I envision things, there is this twofold aspect. There is the chronological unfolding of reality, which is cosmological evolution from the Big Bang, Darwinian evolution, and then historical evolution, so the 13 billion years evolution or something like that, which must be understood by means of scientific rationality in the realm of der Verstand, the categorical Kantian mind, to simplify, the empirical mind, the mind of symbolic logic and physical rationality. So that's a first way of understanding the unfolding of the process of being. But there's another mode, which is vernunftisch, speculative, which is a grasping of unity, of opposites in their unity, and it's a thinking, speculative thinking above and beyond the very notion of time and space. And when you enter this divine consciousness, time and space become irrelevant categories. You enter the mind of the divine and the eternally present divine being. And yeah, so these were my thoughts on the figure of Prometheus, and related to Second World War history and eugenics and the conflict between the chosen people and the Germans. And I'm sure that I've ordered the books about the mythology of Prometheus and the book by Kevin MacDonald, and I don't know if I will have the opportunity to read them, but I'm sure that what I will find in the books will confirm what I vaguely know to be correct. So I wanted to give a mythological perspective on history, and hopefully you will be able to understand the connection between mythology and in this particular case our mythology, if I might speak as a European, whether it be Greek, Roman or Nordic pagan um, mythology and real-time unfolding world events. So that was my contribution for the moment.